I'm going to begin by talking about what I did with a new team coming in, how I approached pre-season, how I approached all the training, and talk about how it went. And obviously, you've probably already guessed it sucked because we had 5 hamstring injuries. But we're going to dig deeper and talk about why maybe it went wrong, and then what I decided to try and do about it and what the results were, and how I'm going to try and improve this moving into the future. So what I did coming into my current team was what I'd always done, and that was because I thought I had a good track record. And if you look at the injury stats that we had with Argentina from 2013 to the very beginning of 2016, there were significant year-on-year reductions. We still had hamstring injuries, but uh, they were down on previous years. I'm not going to talk about weights, and that's because of the kind of Charlie Francis idea that weights are chicken soup. They're just detail. Nobody really tears a hamstring in the gym. If you do, you've probably really messed up. So I'm going to focus on speed. And that's because, as you'll see, that nearly all of the hamstring injuries we had occurred during speed training. So the typical speed progression that I used with my athletes from 2013 to 2016 was a 4, sometimes 5 phase progression, whereby we would begin with tempo because of its lower velocity, higher volume approach, build work capacity, prepare the body for the higher speeds and loads down the line. We would then build on that in phase 2 with sleds for accelerations and build-ups for maximal velocity. This is because it's obviously a progression in intensity and neural demand and load on the tissue from tempo work, but it's still not that you would expect in a 100% full sprint or flying sprint. Maybe there was not enough focus on eccentrics or mimicking the mechanism of injury in the gym. Yes, it's chicken soup, according to Charlie Francis. No, your ability to perform Nordics or eccentric focused RDLs or any other exercise that you want to class as a hamstring injury prevention exercise is not going to have a direct influence on your ability to sprint fast in the field of play. I still believe that sprinting is the most important hamstring injury prevention exercise you can do, but perhaps there was not enough structure in the work that we were doing, and it's certainly a potential large upside for no apparent downside looking back, and that's one of the changes that I made, and that's what you're going to hear about later on. Was I focusing too much on the stuff that didn't matter? Speaking to other coaches who I really, really respect, Dan House, for example, he's spoken to me about high-level teams that don't even measure GPS volume below a certain velocity threshold, just because it's such low intensity. It doesn't actually represent a very large stressor to the body or injury risk. What he convinced me was that we actually need to be much more focused on the higher speed meters rather than the volume as a whole. Yes, it's important to manage volume just as an overall indicator of stress and the structural stress applied to the body, but specific to hamstring injury risk, we really need to be paying more attention to the fastest meters. Also, were the sprint drills that we were performing actually transferring to real running? And the question I asked myself, well, are my best drillers my best sprinters? And sometimes the answer was actually no. So you can do all the A's, B's, and C's, all the different drills, and it may look very nice and very masterful, but unless we're actually seeing that technique be robust to fatigue and all the other different distractions that we see on the rugby field, it could be argued that you're not actually going to see that transfer from drill to field, and that's obviously a problem. So one of the arguments to counter the use of Nordics that people use is, well, Nordics don't even primarily stress the long head of the biceps femoris, which is true. They're going to activate the semimembranosus and the semitendinosus a lot more than the long head of the biceps femoris. But we need to try and understand hamstring injury biomechanics and physiology more deeply. I believe this research comes from David Opar and his hamstring group out of Queensland in Australia, which is if we have a hamstring tear, guys are going to show inhibition of the long head of the biceps femoris for up to a year post return to play. So even when they're back on the pitch, those hamstrings are not going to be activated and firing properly after a hamstring tear. So that means that something has to take up the slack of the work that's not being done by the long head of the biceps femoris. So perhaps we need to preempt that and utilize an exercise which the research shows is going to reduce hamstring injuries, but is also going to heavily tax the musculature that may allow the work of the hamstring to be spread more evenly across all 3 hamstrings and not expose the long head of the biceps femoris to so much stress. So taking what I learned from Lachlan, we went for proximal hamstring training once a week, distal hamstring training once a week. If you look at proximal hamstring training, that is pretty much going to transfer to the stance phase of sprinting, distal hamstring injuries pretty much occur during the swing phase of sprinting. During the early stages of the training, we're looking at what Opar talks about as being long and strong. We're trying to develop eccentric strength in the extremes of range. The shorter the muscle fascicle, the weaker the eccentric strength, the higher the risk. So I believe they call it the quadrant of death. We're trying to avoid that quadrant by working in extremes of range and building athletes who are quite strong eccentrically. A Nordic looks like bodyweight only. I believe this is a female volleyball athlete. Not bad control. You'll see here in the middle, you do get like a lumbar hyperextension. This is one of the things that puts me off most about Nordics. So the way that I try to get around this is to cue, tense your abs like I'm about to punch you, squeeze your butt like it's your first day of prison, or any other more PC coaching cue that you like to use. But I think at some point you just have to take it on the chin that guys are going to get into this position. This is one reason that I'm not going to rely 100% on Nordics, and I'm going to try and coach guys out of it when they do it. This is the famous clip that made Lockie internet famous, the razor curl. Basically, hip flexion, nose to floor, extend the body out to load the hamstrings, and then come back up. Works both proximal and distal portion of the hamstring. Very, very advanced exercise. It is possible to progress towards this by using sliders on the hands to take a little bit of the body weight. I would use it sparingly. From the floor is very, very hard. Probably easier to do on a glute ham bench or a glute ham developer. A little bit easier, but still a very, very useful exercise. A lot of bang for your buck if you're going to use that stance phase. But exactly the same idea. Kicking back, knee flexion, knee extension as fast as possible into the ball. And then we also perform a third variation here, which is straight leg, straight back into the ball. Very high force, very high speed, as you'll be able to see from the video. I've had some discussions with other coaches about this. I think one of the criticisms about this is that we have to be careful about how we mess with the mechanics of sprinting, because what we see in this exercise is not representative of sprint mechanics. However, my retort to that is 2 or 3 sets of that a week when we're doing all of the other stuff that we are to try and improve sprinting speed. I don't think it's going to water down sprinting to the degree that it's not beneficial, and I think it's basically an adapted version of the other 2 exercises that we've already seen, and the guys seem to like it and gravitate towards it, and I'm going to take that information on board and try and keep this in the program. So that's the eccentric training. Now let's talk about the management of high-speed meters, or high-speed running and sprint meters. High-speed running for most people is over 5 or over 6 meters a second. Sprinting, if you use out of the box, is over 8 meters a second. Some people use individualized zones of velocity. However, I'm not in a position where I can do that due to a lack of units relative to the number of players that we have, so we have to use out the box. But as I mentioned from the conversation that I had with Dan House, the faster the speed, the closer we need to manage it. So yes, I'm going to pay attention to total volume, but I'm actually going to pay most attention to the sprint meters.